The following talk is offered freely to ensure that no one is ever denied access to these practices and to these teachings. If you feel inspired to make a donation to support this offering, you can go to my website at jonathanfoust.com. While you're there, you can also sign up for a monthly newsletter designed to support you in your practice. Thank you and enjoy. I'm just back from leading a 3-day intensive at Kripalu Center, where I lived for a couple decades. And nice to see some of the survivors of that retreat are here tonight. That's good. And while I was there with my co-leader of this retreat, I was reminded of a time many, many years ago. And again, I lived there for 24 years. After going there for lunch, I, with another person, I came up with this idea of a 7-day retreat that we were going to called the Art of Joyful Living. And we brainstormed all these amazing things we were going to do, all these creative things, and dance and improv and creative writing and all these super expressive, joyful activities. And so we launched the program, and we had a full group of people who showed up, and they were the saddest people I'd ever seen in my life. I was so naive. Of course, the art of joyful living would attract people who weren't feeling joyful at all, but really wanted it. And suddenly, a redesign of the whole course, where the first half was really looking at the shadow side of joy. There's a quote from, I believe, from Rilke, which I'm going to butcher right now, but it's something to the effect where Rilke says, "Do not seek love. Seek only to bring your attention to the barriers of love." And that's kind of how it works. That if you want to be happy, it's mandatory you need to explore what's between you and feeling happy. And that will begin to open the door. So tonight is about joy, referred to in Pali as mudita, and is considered one of the 4 different ways of describing it, the 4 heavenly abodes, the 4 immeasurable states of the heart, the 4 heavenly attitudes. We talked a little bit of the first 2 weeks ago of loving kindness, of cultivating your capacity for kindness for yourself and others. And again, when you experience these states, they are truly beyond measure. The second of compassion, of learning how to increase your capacity to hold yourself with compassion and hold others with compassion. Tonight we'll talk about joy, and next week we'll talk about the kind of the flower of the practice, which is referred to as equanimity, or the steadiness that is present no matter what the externals are. So I'd like to talk about 4 things. First, a little bit on the unconscious pursuit of joy, kind of the habitual pursuit of joy, and then the radical act of pursuing joy. And a little bit on what are called the near enemies of joy, the things that kind of look like joy, but they're not. And then we'll do some practice of kind of exploring the steps of how these practices really work and how you can effectively tap into them. So, joy, or mudita, is broadly defined as the tapping into that inner spring of joy that is available no matter what the circumstances. And there's some pretty cool things that the Buddha taught about joy, where he said, the more one deeply drinks of this spring of joy, the more securely one becomes in one's own abundant happiness, and the more bountiful it becomes to relish the joy of other people. And it's not just about cultivating your own capacity for joy. Where the real work can be is cultivating what's called sympathetic joy. And that's the capacity to feel joy for other people and to wish other people to feel joy. And it can be a challenging practice. So we have our habitual ways of reinforcing ourselves. And we have habitual ways of wanting what we think will bring us happiness and joy. Someone once told me about the first time that he drank alcohol when he was 13. He and his friends lifted some vodka from his parents' liquor cabinet. And he said, for the first time in my life, my anxiety dropped away. I felt confident, I felt relaxed, and I knew I would do anything to keep this feeling. And as you can imagine, that set up a struggle for him with addiction. And it speaks to the parable of the hungry ghost, which is kind of a classic teaching in Buddhist psychology. And the hungry ghosts are these beings that have these big, big bellies and long, thin necks and tiny little mouths. And no matter how much they consume, they can't get enough to satisfy their belly. So we see that in sort of, the addiction to substances. But of course, addiction is much more than just being addicted to a substance. It can be addicted to anything. Addicted to a belief, addicted to a story. One of my really powerful insights, this is a topic for another talk, but Johns Hopkins has done a lot of research on high-dose psilocybin and its effect on addiction and those with chronic illness. And they were doing a study on the effect on long-term meditators. So I kind of helped them to do, to sort of recruit people and help to work out the protocol. And part of it was I got to do the experience myself. And so, very, very powerful experience. But at the end, I found myself in kind of my reverie, kind of the big conclusion of my event. And I said, it's all about service. It's all about being of service. And I paused and I said, and that's just another story. And I realized I was addicted to that story about who I was and what I meant in the world. And we can get very addicted to the highest concepts. So when we look at that hungry ghost, it's really looking at the fundamental anxiety that we all carry and what we do to soothe that anxiety. So what happens is, somehow we assume that something outside of you is going to make you happy. And then you become relentless in that pursuit. Ray Kroc, who is the founder of McDonald's, he said, if any of my competitors were drowning, I'd stick a hose in their mouth and turn on the water. It's ridiculous to call this an industry. This is not. This is rat eat rat, dog eat dog. I'll kill them and I'm going to kill them before they kill me. You're talking about the American way, survival of the fittest. We will do anything to satisfy what we think is going to make us happy and what we think is going to bring us joy. It's just inborn. And it's not just physical pursuit that's going to make you happy. It's not just about finding the right partner, finding the right job, having enough money, having enough status. That's called kind of all inborn. But I realized in my many, many years of intensive practice how much my own life, when I began to kind of examine all of my crazy practices over the years, how much my life was run by not really physical materialism, but spiritual materialism. And again, with that fundamental angst, just that sense of, oh, I'm going to take a celibacy vow, that'll do it. I'll take a poverty vow, that'll do it. I'll purify my body, I'll do macrobiotics. Now it's fasting, now it's living foods. We all have this wholesome desire to be free, to be happy, to really know what joy means. But it can get corrupted very quickly, no matter how high your intentions. And all the good things I thought I was doing in my spiritual pursuit were really informed by that really deep, deep anxiety, that desire for something to be different. And when we trace that back to the cause of suffering in all of our lives, it has something to do with desire. It's the fundamental seed of desire that puts the whole wheel in motion. And when you look at what sort of drives our economy, we really have sort of the industry of addiction. When I see kids totally sucked into their, whatever it is they're playing, like they're just going for the endorphin hit, at such a young age. The way industry puts salt and fat into food and has kids' meals, in fast food, is to set up that addictive impulse. And of course, we see this all the time. You look at Facebook. What is it keeps you on Facebook? There are times when I just can't believe how sucked I get into YouTube. Have you ever had that experience where you're watching some ridiculous thing on YouTube and you're thinking, how did I end up here? It's really humiliating. I think I was sharing once, I was researching some topic for a talk I was giving, and then somehow I was watching Serbian men wrestling bears, if you look back on your browser history, it's deeply humiliating. But that's the nature of the mind, is to want. The fundamental nature of the mind is it wants more and more in ever-increasing quantities forever. That's just the nature of the mind. And so the Dalai Lama said that the purpose of your life is to be happy and filled with joy. That's your purpose. So then the question becomes, well, then how? And whether you think of the Buddha as kind of someone who walked the earth 2,500 years ago, or just a metaphor of someone waking up in their life, his entire research and development was, where is happiness and where is joy? How do I find that? And given that everything is going to change, everyone gets sick, everyone gets old, everyone's going to die, all material things are going to fall away, where is the happiness? Where is the joy? Where do I find that? That was his fundamental inquiry. And so he explored all kinds of practices, from indulging in the senses to denying the senses to kind of radical practices. And part of his awakening, part of his enlightenment was kind of, I imagined it kind of as the forehead smack, where he said, everyone is looking for happiness in exactly the wrong way. Since all material things are impermanent, looking for happiness in those things just isn't going to happen. And that's the false concept in our culture, is that we can find joy through material happiness. And once you get enough, then you're going to experience joy. And the realization, of course, is that the only true joy that you'll ever find will be found within, and will be found completely non-dependent on external circumstances. And that is a radical practice. That is considered swimming against the stream. And as the Buddha famously said, if this is what you're on for, you are swimming upstream. 2,500 years ago, before the internet, he said you're swimming not only against your own conditioning, but you're swimming against the entire culture when this is what you're focusing on. Because not that many people are interested. And many people will think you're nuts for pursuing that. So then is a question of how. How do you begin to turn your awareness from focusing on the externals to cultivating an internal state that begins to point toward that wellspring of joy? And one of the most reliable ways you can is through turning your attention to gratitude and to appreciation. And when you can begin to focus on gratitude, you're opening up to the yes in life. And that yes is just a different dimension of practice. Father Thomas Keating is a really wonderful, wonderful man. He described, he said that meditation and a meditative life is the practice of consent. It's the practice of saying, yes, this too. So let's just take a moment just to maybe to tune into that. If you like, you can close your eyes. And you might again just refresh this inquiry. When you reflect on someone or something that you're grateful for, that you appreciate, what do you experience on the inside? What kind of shift do you notice? This inquiry into gratitude and appreciation has the potential to open up a sense of receptivity, kind of a softening, a receiving of the moment. And there's another quality of joy that can occur when you are deeply and intimately present. And you might take a moment just to turn your attention to the sounds. And just for the next moment, how intimately can you receive the sounds without any story? Is it possible to be fascinated? And you can very gently deepen the breath. And if you like, you can open the eyes or you can remain with them closed. Gratitude and appreciation can be a doorway to begin to point toward that wellspring of contentment. Another form of joy is the joy that comes from being intimately awake and present. There's some beautiful teachings and practices that the more absorbed you get into something, the more there's a sense of well-being that just arises. Because in those moments of deep absorption, no matter what you're doing, when you're deeply absorbed, you are not wanting your experience to be any different. There's nothing to add, there's nothing to take away. It's this sense of flow, this sense of one moment just opening into the next. It's actually a byproduct of concentration, which is kind of one of the foundations of our practice, that when you get deeply concentrated in your life, no matter what it is, it can be a movie or a book or in nature or intimacy, there's a sense of joy that can arise out of those moments. So as I said, there are two kinds of joy. There's the joy that comes from within, but there's sympathetic joy of your capacity to be happy for another person's happiness. And when you focus on joy, and it becomes kind of a primary filter you're looking through, sometimes there are some traps you can fall into. So I want to name just a few of these, and then we're going to do a kind of a meditation at the end, exploring some of the different strategies for focusing on joy. Some of the near enemies of joy. One of them is what's sometimes called premature transcendence, where you just decide you're going to be joyful and you skip over the anger, the envy, the resentment, and the jealousy, and you just pretend it isn't there. It's also known as spiritual bypassing. You just decide you're going to be joyful, but you don't really do all the work that's really required to really feel it. Sometimes there can be a sense of, I'll just push everything away and not deal with it, and then I'll feel joy. George Burns once said, happiness is having a large, loving, caring, close-knit family in another city. Inevitably, the linear mind is designed to compare. That's how we kind of make our way through life, comparing one thing to another and getting wise discernment and choosing our path. But that comparison can be a setup, because the comparison sets up envy and jealousy and comparison. If you start really wishing other people well, sometimes it can kick in that comparison. If someone has more than you have, and you really dwell on that person, you can start really wondering, well, what about me? What happened to me? I think I've shared in the past, a friend of mine from high school, said, hey, I just published my third book, and I think it's my best one. It was hard for me to muster sympathetic joy because I hadn't finished my first one. So inevitably that will become part of the practice when you focus on joy. And it's interesting when you really reflect on joy that is independent of external conditions. Sometimes there can be a sense of sadness around how much of your life you've been chasing happiness outside. Quite often, as people begin to really reflect on what it means to cultivate these states, there can be a real sense of, wow, I've just been chasing. I've been chasing so much my whole life. I've been chasing the job, chasing the promotion, looking for that perfect relationship that never materialized, trying to get the right car that was going to make me happy and find the right house that was going to make me happy. Quite often there can be sadness that's associated with this. So I'd like to lead another short little reflection, if you don't mind. We've explored this practice of inquiry before. And I'd just like to offer you a question. And we'll repeat this question just for a few rounds, just to sort of notice what arises through this inquiry practice. When you think of your life right now, when you sense what's falling away, what's calling you forward, what's between you and feeling joy right now? You might name one thing and just say hello to that. And then imagine you could place the concern for that to the side. And then again, what's between you and feeling joy in your life right now? Naming one thing. And say hello to it. And gently place the concern for that to the side. And then again, what's between you and feeling joy in your life right now? And placing that to the side, and then once more. What's between you and feeling joy in your life right now? And in your own way, just say hello to this landscape of what you've named. And then as you're ready, you can let your eyes open, or you can remain with them closed. I find that inquiry to be quite powerful, because quite often it will begin to reveal all the small and the big things that are between you and feeling joy. And yet, you are the one who is aware of that. And inevitably, you may be drawn to investigate some of what you've named and to look more closely and to sense how it might be possible to bring a sense of healing to that. So much of our life has been chasing lights and rainbows, and chasing joy externally. Sometimes joy can take the form of Schadenfreude, where we find a certain kind of happiness at the suffering or the discomfort of our enemies, yet another one of the near enemies. It's an incredibly challenging process, to begin to actively look and pursue what true joy means. Because it means we're moving from a small, tightly bound, fear-based self to one that can be more free, that can feel more generous. And as in that earlier quote, that the more you immerse yourself in this inquiry, the more you can recognize that this is actually your true nature. And you'll find more and more joy in those around you. I was just reflecting on that. Is there an example I could think of? And here's kind of a small one. One of my favorite things in life is being right here with you on Monday nights. I so much enjoy this. And giving a talk every week is incredibly creative. It's really fun. But giving a talk every week is also challenging because I want it to be helpful, want it to be inspiring if I can, at least do as little psychic damage as possible. And a while back, I noticed, because it's about 45 talks a year. That's a lot of talks. And I noticed I had a temptation to hold my stuff back. Like, I think I want to save that joke for the retreat I'm doing, or I'm going to maybe save that story for later. And when I noticed that, I thought, from now on, I'm never going to hold my best stuff back. I'm just going to, whatever I have, the best I have, I'm going to offer it. And with that came kind of this clench. Like, what if I run out of stuff to say? You may have noticed I haven't. But what's so interesting, when I really embrace that sense of, okay, if I got a really good joke, I'm not going to save it, I'm going to let it go. If I got a good story, I'm going to share it. It's kind of created a vacuum. And at least up to this point, it's just opened something up inside. And I think it's the same way that when you really cultivate being a well-wisher of joy, it creates a vacuum. The more you offer it out, the more it creates a vacuum, and the more it can kind of pull that in. So when you explore what it means to cultivate joy, I kind of think of it like you get a new car. You're really happy. You have a sense that like this car is enough. Of course, there's the first scratch, but right before that, there's that sense like this is enough. Right now, this is wonderful. And I think that's joy. But that same sense of joy that's not dependent on the car is what we're talking about. That same sense of, this is wonderful. Like, this is enough right now. Thank you. I'm so grateful. That state that's not dependent on externals. Whenever we can tap into that, there's an aliveness there. I had some good friends. They were getting ready to retire. They met with their financial planner, and he said, okay, I think, in 4 more years you're going to be ready. And they said, no, this is enough. And just that sense of, this is enough, thank you, sets up a very powerful internal state. So some of the ways that you can tap into the joy, the classical ways. First is this gladdening of the mind, just something you're grateful for. And then take some time to think of your benefactors. Think of your allies, the ones who love you and really wish you well. And you wish them joy. You think of those you love, like when you see a niece or a nephew or a child taking their first steps, just that pure joy you have for their discovery, for their success. That's kind of what you're cultivating. So you start where it's easy. And then you turn to wishing yourself well. And then you can turn your attention to what's called a neutral person, the kind of people you just pass on the street every day. And you wish them well. You look to take happiness at their success. And then you can explore those who are doing you harm, which is always a challenge. But there's a beautiful little piece, which we've done before with the other practices, and we'll end on that, where you offer the sense of joy in front of you, to the sides, above, below, to all beings. And you infuse your body and the space around you with this well-wishing for all. So we'll close our evening with this practice. So if you like, you can close your eyes. Some people find this helpful to bring their hand to their heart. Sometimes that can be a nice little physical anchor. And in your own time, again, you might let your attention just settle on something you're grateful for, something you deeply appreciate. And you might slow down and deepen your breath. I'm going to offer just some minimal guidance here. Might bring into mind those in your inner circle, your benefactors, your friends, your allies, those who you know, appreciate, are on your team, and take some time to feel your gratitude for them, your appreciation for them, and to wish them true joy. All those you sincerely appreciate in your life. And you might now turn your attention to yourself, to wish yourself a joyful life. To increase your capacity to tap into that wellspring of deep well-being, independent of externals. And you might now just take a moment or maybe a minute to think of people that you encounter on a daily basis that you have no particular attraction or aversion toward. Or just people you kind of pass on the street or you might see daily where you live or where you work. And just take a moment to feel grateful for them. To celebrate their success, their happiness, and their joy. And now we'll explore this sense of widening the circle. Can you imagine the space in front of you, beyond the furthest star, filled with thoughts of unselfish joy? Can you imagine the space behind you, extending out beyond the furthest star, filled and suffused with thoughts of joy? Can you imagine the space to the left of you, extending out beyond the furthest star, filled and suffused with thoughts of joy? Can you imagine the space to the right of you, beyond the furthest star, filled with thoughts of unselfish joy? And can you imagine the space above you, the space below you, the space inside you, and filled with a heart of joy, without hostility, and filled with well-being for all? And closing this meditation by again wishing yourself well. To imagine your capacity for joy, deepening and widening. Your life filled with an ease of well-being. Your heart, your cup overflowing. We'll close with these words from the Buddha. Live in joy, in love, even among those who hate. Live in joy, in health, even among the afflicted. Live in joy, in peace, even among the troubled. Look within and be still, free from fear and attachment. Know the sweet joy of the way. When you're ready, you can deepen your breath. When you're ready, you can open your eyes. Thank you for your time and attention. And even though life and true joy is completely independent of externals, we do have cookies for you tonight. Enjoy your evening. And next week we're going to talk about equanimity, which is really considered the essence and the flower of practice.